A bit of a breather for U.S. stocks after the longest win streak in 2 years. Live from Studio 2 here at Bloomberg headquarters in New York, I'm Romaine Bostick.
And I'm Katie Greifeld, kicking you off to closing bell here in the U.S. Like Romaine mentioned, the streak is over, at least for right now. You have the S&P 500 pretty much a little changed, but still in the red, down less than 0.1%. It's the same if you take a look at big tech, the NASDAQ 100 off by about 0.1% as well. Even as we see that bond rally continue, you take a look at the 10-year Treasury yield right now, down another 5-6 basis points, getting very, very close to 4.5%. Again, 2 weeks ago, we were at 5%. So what a change there. And Romaine, I want to keep an eye on the VIX as well because we broke below 15, currently trading at 14.6.